It's genuinely somewhat intensely unremarkable regarding the concluding hour of your life. Zero theatrical audio. Zero slow motion sequences. Zero speaker seriously clarifying what's occurring. For most humans, the huge majority in truth, the closing 60 minutes appear nothing like what film and television have trained you to anticipate. The space isn't brilliantly illuminated and packed with weeping assembled relatives sharing flawlessly timed final words. It's normally softer than that, calmer, more anatomical, and in some regards more bizarre and more captivating than any theatrical rendition could depict. This presentation is about what is genuinely occurring to your body, to your mind, to your senses, to your chemistry, in the closing 60 minutes of life. Not in a grim fashion, in a here's what the research actually reveals fashion, which is frankly much more intriguing than you'd anticipate. Because parts of what occurs in those closing minutes are truly spectacular. There are brain signals discharging in configurations tied to intense awareness. There are neurochemicals saturating your body that scientists believe could be accountable for the most intense sensations a living person could experience. There is even, according to experts, a highly likely probability your closing hour contains something that appears, from the exterior, like the most vivid dream of your life. So, let's journey through this, minute by minute, system by system, from the initial observable indicators that the finale is nearing, all the way to the final electrical impulse your mind ever creates. To comprehend the closing hour, you need to comprehend what the body is executing in the days and hours leading up to it, because the finale doesn't begin when you assume it does. The expiring sequence in most natural deaths is gradual. The heart starts to pump a little less effectively. Blood travels more sluggishly throughout the body. The mind and organs begin getting less oxygen than they require to operate normally, and the body, in reaction, initiates a silent, methodical closure of non-critical networks to channel what minimal energy persists to the ones it deems most crucial for survival. This isn't a choice being made anywhere. It's merely the body obeying the mechanics of its own degradation, performing what networks do when they run out of fuel, prioritizing the vital operations and allowing everything else go dark. By the time you're in the closing hour, this sequence has been ongoing for a while. The individual is normally profoundly unaware or floating in and out of a condition that's tough to categorize as either slumber or wakefulness. Blood pressure is dropping. The limbs, the hands and feet, are chilly to the touch and might have taken on a bluish or spotted appearance, occasionally termed livido reticularis, as blood flow withdraws from the body's borders and focuses around the vital organs. The legs and feet could form a purplish, patchy discoloration that medical staff identify instantly as a signal the body is in its closing hours. The visage also alters. The muscles loosen in manners they seldom do during regular slumber. The jaw might loosen. The skin could take on a waxy, pale, or faintly yellow characteristic. The eyes, even if partially unclosed, tend to be blurry, with the irises shifted upward or to the side. If you've stood at the bedside of someone in their closing hours, you recognize this appearance. It's undeniable. It's not sleep, even though it mimics it. It's something deeper. Now, here's where it begins to become truly bizarre. Respiration alters significantly in the closing hour, and the way it alters is one of the most medically dependable indicators that passing is near. The rhythm has a title, Cheyne Stokes Breathing, titled after the two doctors who initially detailed it in the early 1800s. What it appears like in reality is this: phases of exhaling that increase and then fade away. Multiple inhales in a sequence, becoming a bit deeper, a bit quicker, and then fading down into lighter and lighter inhales, succeeded by a break where respiration halts completely. These breaks, termed apneas, could stretch anywhere from a few moments to almost a minute, and then the phase starts anew. For the individual passing, this is not painful. The brain's oxygen-detecting systems are switching offline, thus the frantic need to inhale that you'd experience if you held your breath isn't being activated the exact way. The brainstem, the most primitive section of the mind, the section that manages involuntary respiration and heartbeat, is still attempting to preserve its tempos, yet it's functioning with less and less to run on. The Cheyne Stokes rhythm is basically that brainstem performing its utmost with a collapsing network. It's the physiological counterpart of a vehicle motor stalling on an almost depleted tank. For the individuals in the space, it's one of the toughest events to observe. Observing someone cease exhaling and waiting, occasionally for 30 or 40 or 50 seconds, for the upcoming inhale to arrive, and then viewing them inhale anew and restarting the tally over, is an event that lingers with you. Hospice caregivers and doctors are instructed to clarify it, to standardize it, to assure relatives that this is not agony. Yet realizing that doesn't render it simple to view. Alongside the respiratory shifts, something else frequently occurs that's similarly unsettling for onlookers: a noise. Palliative staff label it the terminal rattle, a phrase that seems brutal, yet outlines something that's genuinely clinically very harmless. As gulping responses fade, saliva and phlegm gather in the rear of the throat. The air moving through those fluids generates a bubbling, rattling noise with every breath and exhalation. Clinical proof is uniform on one detail here. This noise is not an indicator of discomfort or agony in the departing individual. It sounds awful. It is, by all reports, not awful to undergo. Most individuals at this phase are profoundly asleep and ignorant of it. Yet the individuals waiting with them detect it, and that noise, more than almost anything else at the conclusion of living, is what lingers in the mind of the persons left behind. Let's converse about the mind, since this is where details grow truly spectacular. Throughout most of the timeline of healthcare, passing was comprehended as a fairly basic off switch. The heart halts, blood circulation ends, the mind runs out of oxygen, and everything turns dark. A sorrowful, yet physically mundane ending. A deactivation, not an occurrence. What science in the past decade or so has started to propose is that this model is incorrect, or at least severely incomplete. In 2013, a group of scientists tracking the minds of expiring rats found something that nobody anticipated. In the moments directly after cardiac failure, the rats' minds didn't turn silent. They erupted with action, high-frequency brain signals, gamma vibrations, the exact brain signal rhythm linked with elevated awareness, concentrated focus, intense dreaming, and memory recall, spiked to heights genuinely greater than those logged during regular wakefulness. The failing mind wasn't shutting down. It was shortly and ironically shifting into overdrive. Next, in 2023, scientists released results from EEG tracking of 4 human subjects who perished following withdrawal of life assistance. 2 of those 4 displayed the exact rhythm. As oxygen amounts fell and the heart halted, there was a quick spike of gamma signal action in brain zones linked with mindful processing, visual zones, spatial recognition hubs, zones engaged in combining physical data and creating memories. These weren't chaotic static. They were structured, logical vibrations of the type the mind generates throughout its most engaged, alert conditions. What does that signify? No one is totally certain. However, the theory that scientists keep returning back toward, cautiously, since this is research and not hopeful dreaming, is that this spike in mind action could be the neural match of what near-death event survivors detail. A sensation of deep sharpness, a rapid life assessment, the feeling of recollections rushing back with incredible lucidity and passionate strength. The fading mind, deprived of oxygen and with 0 remaining to forfeit, might shortly generate one of the most vivid aware sensations in a lifespan. Not as a solace, not as a planned trait, potentially simply as a result of the biochemistry of what occurs when the mechanism breaks apart. This leads us to the biochemistry, since the mind at the conclusion of living is performing something incredible on a cellular scale as well. As the body endures the severe biological strain of passing, it discharges a flood of neurochemicals. Endorphins, the brain's inherent painkillers, are created in massive amounts. These are the exact compounds that trigger runner's high, that dull agony throughout trauma, that generate sensations of heat and bliss throughout severe bodily events. In the setting of passing, they are believed to soften agony and add to the tranquil, even serene, visages that palliative staff routinely document observing on the countenances of individuals in their closing hours, even whenever those passings succeed severe sickness or trauma. Serotonin is discharged in heightened volumes. Serotonin manages temperament, awareness, and mindfulness. And heightened serotonin is the pathway by which psychedelic substances like psilocybin generate their outcomes. Intense optical sensations, modified time awareness, sensations of cosmic unity. Inside the failing mind, increasing serotonin could add to the visionary nature of the event. And additionally, there is DMT, dimethyltryptamine, a naturally existing hallucinogenic substance generated in tiny quantities by the human mind, specifically by the pineal gland. It's broadly theorized, although not currently conclusively established, that the failing mind discharges DMT in vastly greater volumes than usual. The proof for this is somewhat circumstantial. Scientists contrasting near-death event stories against DMT journey logs discover the resemblance startling enough to be medically significant. Both contain feelings of exiting the body, corridors of brightness, meetings with seen beings, timelessness, and an overpowering feeling of significance. A 2018 trial provided DMT to volunteers in a regulated medical environment and discovered their described sensations were weirdly identical to near-death stories in their substance, passionate strength, and format. Huge discharges of adrenaline and noradrenaline are additionally happening, the fight-or-flight compounds saturating the form in one final survival effort. These might add to the elevated condition of alertness that certain near-death survivors detail. A network shifting into peak output crisis setting, mobilizing every asset it currently has availability to. The total impact of all this biochemistry in the closing minutes might be a sensation of awareness that is, by the standards we'd apply for any alternative event, truly powerful. Not inevitably agonizing, not inevitably terrifying, potentially the reverse, potentially something nearer to elevation than to deprivation. Although science isn't in a situation to declare assured statements regarding that, and it's crucial to be truthful regarding what we grasp and what we're guessing. One of the most notable and functionally crucial details that study has confirmed regarding the closing hour is regarding the senses. Namely, which ones fade initially and which one persists the maximum. Sight fades quickly. The eyes, even if unclosed, drop their capacity to concentrate and process. Flavor and scent, which are already reduced in the closing days, decline further. Feeling remains longer than most individuals anticipate. The feeling of a hand being grasped, a soft caress on the brow, is probably still being perceived deep into slumber. Palliative staff and end-of-life care caregivers frequently advise relatives to continue touching, continue clasping hands, since there is real justification to think that bodily connection is still accessing something, even whenever the individual seems totally unreactive. And subsequently there is listening. Auditory is the final faculty to fade. This isn't merely traditional knowledge handed down across eras of palliative personnel. A scientific squad at the University of British Columbia genuinely evaluated it utilizing EEG to gauge mind reactions to audio in subjects who were in the closing hours of living and totally unreactive. The minds of those subjects still displayed trackable reactions to sonic triggers. The fading mind was still at some degree handling noise, still noticing that something was being spoken, even if the individual couldn't indicate alertness in any manner. This discovery counts vastly for relatives, since it implies that the phrases you speak in that space, even whenever the individual seems to be totally departed, even whenever they haven't reacted in hours, might be accessing them. The tone of someone they adore, sifted via whatever survives of their sonic handling, might still be arriving somewhere. The scientists who performed this analysis were cautious not to exaggerate. They couldn't verify if the fading subjects were knowingly conscious of what they were detecting, yet they demonstrated via trackable mind action that the hearing network was still operating, still absorbing. Palliative ideology has functioned upon this premise for decades. Continue speaking. Continue uttering what requires to be stated. Continue broadcasting the melodies they adored. Continue staying present via your tone, even after everything else appears to have vanished. The research for once concurs. Let's use a second to discuss the near-death sensation directly, since it's the segment of this subject that creates the most inquiries, the most optimism, and the most debate. Near-death events, NDEs, have been documented for millennia of time throughout practically every society in shapes surprisingly uniform, alongside one another, despite the truth that the individuals experiencing them had zero interaction alongside one another, and zero common societal framework regarding what passing ought seem like. Corridor of brightness. Existence assessment. Sensation of overpowering tranquility. Feeling of exiting the form and watching it from overhead. Meeting alongside an entity or a shape. Being informed it's not time and being guided back. These are not uncommon events. Analyses of cardiac failure survivors regularly discover that somewhere betwixt 6 and 12% detail some type of NDE. That's not an insignificant quantity of persons, and the uniformity of the accounts throughout societies, ages, spiritual histories, and chronological eras is one of the traits that forces scientists treat the occurrence earnestly, irrespective of what they suppose it signifies. What triggers it? The truthful reply is we don't entirely comprehend. The gamma signal spike clarifies part of the neural foundation. The biochemistry, endorphins, serotonin, potential DMT discharge clarify part of the phenomena. Oxygen starvation solely could generate tunnel sight and modified conditions. The rum invasion theory proposes that the mind stem during a crisis might spark something mimicking a dream condition inside a mind that is otherwise growing unaware. Each of these pathways are authentic and recorded. Zero of them has been conclusively demonstrated to be the complete clarification. What we could state is that the internal sensation detailed by individuals who have drawn extremely near to passing and recovered is nearly consistently outlined as favorable, not horrifying, not agonizing, frequently outlined as the most gorgeous event of their lifetimes. Persons who have possessed NDEs routinely detail diminished dread of passing thereafter, a realignment towards whatever they outline as truly crucial in living, and a feeling that whatever they met was more authentic, not lesser, than typical conscious events. Research cannot inform you what that signifies. Philosophy cannot completely inform you what that signifies. Yet the statistics regarding what individuals undergo and how it alters them is uniform enough to treat earnestly. Throughout the absolute closing minutes, once the respiration has turned agonal, hardly existing, more like sporadic gasps than any identifiable breathing tempo, the heart delivers its final functional squeezes. Blood tension drops to zero. The mind, starved of the oxygen it requires to preserve even the absolute lowest operation, starts to turn ultimately and totally mute. Yet even this isn't immediate. Medical passing, categorized as the stopping of pulse and respiration, is not the identical as physical passing, the conclusion of every cellular action. For minutes following the heart halting, certain neurons are still sparking. Certain cells are still handling whatever survives inside the network. The border is not a mark, rather a spectrum, and precisely where it sits is something that contemporary healthcare is still vigorously arguing alongside actual impacts regarding inquiries surrounding organ gifting, revival scheduling, and the categorization of passing itself. The mind's electrical action, via most assessments, is vanished inside minutes of the heart halting. Yet those closing minutes, the gamma signal spike, the neurochemical flood, whatever internal sensation they might generate, those are truly baffling. They rest directly on the fringe of what research could monitor and what it could clarify, and they stay one of the most truly unresolved inquiries inside all of neurology. What the closing hour of living is not, and this is worth stating plainly, is what most individuals dread. It is practically never marked through harsh agony in situations wherever there is excellent soothing support. It is practically never marked through dread or restlessness throughout the closing phase of slumber. The physical shifts, the chilling limbs, the modified respiration, the terminal rattle, are upsetting to view, yet are not, as much as healthcare could conclude, upsetting to undergo. The mind's personal biochemistry seems to dull the harsh points of the sequence. What most departing individuals appear like throughout those closing minutes is tranquil, not inside a symbolic, zero distress over context. Inside an evident, bodily, that's how the visage appears externally context. The muscles loosen entirely in manners they never fully achieved throughout typical slumber. The expressions ease. The form, which has been laboring so intensely for so long, eventually halts laboring, and whatever persists is motionless. If something additional proceeds, if awareness endures in any shape past the final electrical impulse inside the mind, is a query that research cannot presently resolve and might never be capable of. It is the earliest query, and it stays unresolved. What research could inform us is that the passage toward that brink is vastly deeper, vastly weirder, and vastly less grim than most individuals envision. A mind sparking in incredible configurations, a biochemistry generating conditions of perception that survivors detail as monumental, a perceptive network clinging onto noise, clinging onto the tones of the individuals who count longer than almost anything else, a form that is completely up until the absolute finale, executing everything it understands how to execute to retain the individual inside it anchored. And subsequently, silently, it halts. And whatever existed there, the gathered burden of an entire existence, every recollection, every connection, every instance of happiness and sorrow and mundane Wednesday afternoon, either travels somewhere else or it doesn't. Research is still focusing on that detail,